A'Lelia Walker was the daughter of Madam C.J. Walker, the first self-made female millionaire in United States history. After inheriting her fortune, A'Lelia began spending it in various ways, and though her business acumen was limited, she carved out her own place in American history. Also, I've already covered the life of Madam C.J. Walker, so make sure to check that out in the links below. Let's get into the video. The woman who has become known to history as A'Lelia Walker was born as Lelia McWilliams on the 6th of June 1885 in the city of Vicksburg in Mississippi. Lelia's mother was Sarah Breedlove, a woman who had been born into extreme poverty in rural Louisiana in 1867. She was the first member of her family to be born free, and her parents and older siblings had been enslaved before the American Civil War and Emancipation Act. Orphaned by the age of 7, Sarah moved to Vicksburg, Mississippi, where she began working as a domestic servant. Here, she married one Moses McWilliams when she was just 14 years of age, and 3 years later, their marriage resulted in Lelia, their only child. Very little is known of Lelia's father, Moses, and it isn't even clear what age he was when he married Sarah. In any event, he did not feature in Lelia's life to any large extent, as he died in 1887 when she was just 2 years old. In later years, Lelia would have 2 different stepfathers, a man called John Davis, whom her mother married in 1894 and remained wed to until they divorced in 1903, and Charles Joseph Walker, a newspaper advertising salesman that Sarah married in 1906. Lelia's life story is intrinsically linked to her mother's rise as a businesswoman. After Lelia's father died, she and her mother moved to St. Louis in Missouri, where Lelia's uncles had settled some years earlier. It was here that Sarah began learning about hair care in the 1890s, inspired to some extent by her own issues with dandruff and scalp ailments. Then, when the World's Fair was hosted in St. Louis in 1904, Sarah was hired as a saleswoman by Annie Malone, an African-American hair entrepreneur who had a stand at the fair. It was enough experience for Sarah to branch out on her own and set up a hair care company. Shortly afterwards, when she married her third husband, Charles Joseph Walker, she took his initials and began referring to herself as Madam C.J. Walker, and she called her business the Madam C.J. Walker Company. The Madam C.J. Walker Company soon began to meet with significant success. Sarah and her husband Charles toured many of the southern states drumming up business, while Lelia, who had spent some time studying at Knoxville College in Tennessee in the mid-1900s, was placed in charge of a mail-order operation which was established in Denver, Colorado, strategically located between the east and west coasts. It was also around this time that Lelia began referring to herself as A'Lelia Walker, taking her second stepfather's surname and adding an A before Lelia to add some levity to her Christian name. By the early 1910s, the Madam C.J. Walker Company was booming. Sarah's business model involved training young African-American women as regional salespeople who sold a variety of products which the company manufactured, including their own recipe hair loss shampoos, combs and pomade, or wax which was advertised as stimulating hair growth. By the mid-1910s, the company employed thousands of saleswomen countrywide, and Sarah had become a self-made millionaire, arguably the first self-made female millionaire in American history. A'Lelia played a role in her mother's business throughout these years. Having established the mail order center in Denver, she subsequently moved to Pittsburgh to oversee the establishment of an office there. Then, in the 1910s, she was placed in charge of the company's sales on the east coast of America. 2 5-story buildings on West 136th Street in Harlem in New York City were purchased and converted into one space, which became the company's headquarters in the city. The first floor served as the Walker Company hair parlor. The second floor housed what was termed the Lelia College of Beauty Culture, where Walker Company saleswomen and groomers were trained, while the 3rd, 4th and 5th floors became A'Lelia's home and private space for entertaining. Elilia's mother died on the 25th of May 1919 from kidney failure, at just 51 years of age. With her death, Elilia became president of the Madam C.J. Walker Company, and also a millionaire in her own right. Her fortune would equate to well over $20 million in today's money, and Elilia intended to spend this on various social and cultural endeavours. As such, while she remained president of the Walker Company for the duration of her own life and continued to act as the face of the brand, she did not take charge of the day-to-day running of the company in the early 1920s. Instead, the management was handed over to a team who ran it from the head office in the city of Indianapolis, where the company's main distribution center had been constructed and opened in 1917. It was following her move to New York and her mother's death that Elilia entered into the activity which she would be most acclaimed for. This was her role as a patron and participant in the Harlem Renaissance. Harlem in Upper Manhattan had originally been a center of Dutch settlement in New York and was named for the city of Haarlem in the Netherlands. However, in the course of the 19th century, and in particular following the American Civil War and during the Great Migration of the first half of the 20th century, it morphed into a predominantly African American neighborhood, as millions of Black Americans left rural communities in the southern states and headed to the cities. By the start of the 1920s, Harlem was a flourishing community, buoyed up with the increase in material conditions of African Americans and with new money coming in on the back of the economic boom of the 1920s, the so-called Roaring Twenties. It was these circumstances which had led the Walker C.J. Company to establish their New York offices here in the late 1910s. The 1920s witnessed a cultural and social revival of African American writing, poetry, music, art and fashion in the neighborhood, which has since come to be termed the Harlem Renaissance. Elilia was not a significant writer or artist herself, but she used her considerable wealth in the 1920s to provide patronage to numerous figures that were. These included John Rosamond Johnson, a composer and singer who gained national attention during the 1920s, the poets Langston Hughes and County Cullen, and the cabaret and vaudeville performers and comedians Bert Williams and Florence Mills. Elilia turned part of her huge mansion in Harlem into a literary salon, which hosted meetings and parties at which some of these figures interacted and shared their ideas on their work. Yet, many of these parties were full of glamour and flamboyance, and focused on pleasure over work. As a result, nearly all of Harlem probably would have wanted to attend, and despite the several hundred invitations she issued for each event, hundreds more would arrive. Every corner of her apartment was filled with guests, and it was described as being as crowded as a New York subway during rush hour. Nevertheless, it appeared as though many enjoyed the crowding. While some, such as Hughes, praised her activities, calling her the joy goddess of Harlem's 1920s, others, such as Roy Otley, described her as the mahogany millionairess who spent money recklessly and wore outlandish clothes. These parties also led to considerable interaction between communities, as often white poets, writers and performers from Greenwich Village in Lower Manhattan would attend the events Elilia hosted. In 1927, she even refurbished a floor of her home and christened it the Dark Tower, for holding further events and parties. Her patronage also extended to the wider community, and Elilia became involved in numerous religious and community groups in Harlem in the 1920s. Through these, she sat on several committees charged with developing the area and providing funding for the same. She was particularly anxious to promote women's groups in Harlem during the interwar period. And all of this had an impact. The Harlem Renaissance is generally credited today with imbuing much of the African American community in the United States with a new sense of identity and pride, ones which contributed in a significant manner to the development of the civil rights movement, which in the 1950s and early 1960s eventually ended segregation in America. In contributing to the movement, Elilia made her own mark on American history in the interwar years. Elilia also traveled extensively during the 1920s, and in her travels tried to engage with international cultures and ideas which could be brought back to Harlem. For instance, in 1921, she went on a 4-month trip to Europe, visiting Nice and Monte Carlo in the south of France, and spending time in Paris, the cultural capital of the world in the 1920s. She also visited London, Naples and Rome during her European sojourn. However, perhaps her most noteworthy international trip was to Africa in 1922. There, she passed through Cairo before heading to the Horn of Africa to Addis Ababa, the capital of one of the only countries on the African continent which was not ruled by a European power at the time, the Empire of Abyssinia, which corresponds to modern-day Ethiopia. There she met with Empress Zudichu, the ruler of the empire, and the future Emperor Haile Selassie, who in the 1920s was regent of the Empress's government. Like many others after her, Alelia was inspired by the native African state here, and it influenced her to take a more active role in the Harlem Renaissance when she returned to America. Alelia was married 3 times. Her first marriage was to a hotel waiter by the name of John Robinson. When exactly they married is not clear, but it must have been when she was relatively young in the mid-1900s. The union was troubled, and the couple separated in 1911, though they did not finalize their divorce until 1914, when Alelia moved to New York. It was shortly after their informal separation that Alelia adopted a girl aged around 15 named Fairy Mae Bryant, who took the name Mae Walker. She would be Alelia's only daughter, and she never had biological children. Further marriages followed in later years. In 1919, around the time she became president of the Madam C.J. Walker Company, she married Wiley Wilson, a doctor whom she divorced after a few years. In November 1923, while Alelia was going through her divorce, she arranged for her daughter to marry Dr. Gordon H. Jackson, the grandson of a wealthy Cincinnati coal merchant. As with many socialites of the time, this was a chance to unite 2 distinguished families, and Alelia was willing to spend huge amounts on the event, totaling $42,000, or about $600,000 today. The wedding was dubbed Harlem's social event of the season and of the year, and over 9,000 people attended the party, which took place at Walker's Irvington mansion called Villa Luaro. Yet, there was one major issue. Walker's daughter Mae was in love with someone else. Thus, despite the marriage going ahead and a child being born to the pair, they divorced just a year later. It was also around this time that Alelia finalized her divorce with her second husband, and she soon found a new love herself, marrying Dr. James Arthur Kennedy in 1926. Nevertheless, this union too ended in divorce early in 1931. Despite these marriages, Alelia's sexuality has been a subject of discussion. Her salon in Harlem became a welcome environment during the late 1910s and 1920s for members who were known parts of the LGBT community of the time. As described by several prominent figures of the Harlem Renaissance who attended her parties, the sexual atmosphere at these were as permissive as it could be in the 1920s. This has led to considerable speculation that Alelia herself was lesbian or bisexual, and this has increased in recent years owing to her portrayal in the Netflix series Self-Made. In the show, she is in a romantic relationship with a character called Esther, and this causes tensions with her mother. Yet, in reality, this was entirely made up by the showrunners, and there is little evidence to support this hypothesis. So, while her views on sexuality were entirely liberal, we do not know of any sustained relationship she had with another woman, and her 3 marriages, each coming in quick succession after her previous divorce, would further seem to suggest that Alelia was heterosexual. Alelia died relatively suddenly on the 17th of August 1931 at just 46 years of age. The cause was a cerebral hemorrhage brought on by hypertension, a condition which had also contributed to her mother's premature death. When her funeral was held several days later on 7th Avenue, thousands of Harlem residents attended what was effectively a large party. She was buried at Woodland Cemetery in the Bronx next to her mother. The Harlem poet Langston Hughes dubbed her death, quote, "the end of the gay times in Harlem." Following Alelia's death, her daughter Mae took over the running of the Madam C.J. Walker Company. It was a difficult time for the company, as the Great Depression continued into the mid-1930s and sales plummeted. Nevertheless, May sold off some of her adopted mother's assets and kept it afloat so that her own daughter, Alelia May Perry Bundles, could become the fourth president of a once again profitable company in the post-war period. The company closed its doors in 1981, but in 2020, Sundial Brands revived the brand name. This was partly in an effort to profit off the release of Self-Made, a Netflix series charting the life of Madam C.J. Walker, in which Alelia features as a major figure. Thus, in recent years, there has been much discussion of her life. Thank you everyone so much for watching this video on Alelia Walker. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of her life, and if you have any other suggestions, also leave them in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. And if you want to check out anything I use for my videos, be sure to click the links in the description. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.